Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Sunlight filtered through the dusty blinds of Roosevelt High School, casting beams of light onto the empty hallways. In the teacher's office, Mr. Thompson, a math teacher known for his arrogance and constant need to demonstrate his intellectual superiority, scribbled complex equations on a whiteboard. His colleagues whispered, afraid of incurring his sarcastic remarks. At the other end of the corridor, James Carter, the school janitor, was pushing his cleaning cart. James was in his 50s, with an imposing stature and a humble appearance that deceived anyone who crossed his path. Quiet and reserved, he knew every corner of the school and every student by name. But what no one knew was that James was a true mathematical genius, self-taught since childhood, capable of solving problems that even qualified teachers found unsolvable. That day, Mr. Thompson, irritated by James's presence in the corridor as he was disrupting his routine, decided to challenge him. In a condescending tone, he approached and said, "Hey, James, if you're as clever as some people claim, try solving this." He scribbled an incredibly complex equation on a scrap of paper, a mix of differential calculus and advanced algebra, and handed it to James with a smirk. The concierge's eyes fell upon the equation. For a moment, a heavy silence hung in the corridor, broken only by the hum of the fans and the rustling of leaves. Then, calmly, almost amused, James took the paper. His fingers barely trembled, but his mind worked at lightning speed. In less than a minute, he drew a series of calculations on a piece of paper and, with a quiet smile, handed the correct answer to Mr. Thompson. The professor froze, feeling his arrogance waver. His colleagues, witnesses to the scene, held their breath. The black concierge, whom everyone had underestimated, had just proven that one should never judge a person by their appearance. James nodded and resumed driving his cart as if nothing had happened, leaving behind a silence thick with surprise and disbelief. Mr. Thompson, for the first time in years, felt shame burning in his chest. And so James Carter, the man invisible to all, began to change the perception of those who had always underestimated him. The school bell rang through the corridors, but for James Carter, the caretaker, each sound was just a note in the daily symphony of his routine. He swept the main hall with meticulous precision, ensuring nothing was left to chance. The students, engrossed in their conversations and phones, paid him little attention. But on that day, something unexpected would shatter the calm. Mr. Thompson, still marked by his pride, had summoned James to the corridor near the teacher's office. His colleagues watched him, some with amusement, others with embarrassment, knowing that their professor loved to belittle those he considered inferior. "James, I bet you'll never be able to solve this," said Mr. Thompson, brandishing a new problem, even more complex than the one he had shown him the previous day. James paused for a moment. He studied the paper. The symbols seemed to dance before his eyes, but in his mind, everything fell into place like a perfectly aligned puzzle. He betrayed nothing on his face. With a slight smile, he picked up the paper, crouched slightly to write more easily on a sheet he took from his pocket, and began to calculate. Mr. Thompson, certain of his victory, approached to observe. "You're going to fail, James. Seriously, why are you meddling in things that are beyond you?" James looked up. His gaze was calm, almost amused. "Perhaps what you think is impossible is actually just a poorly framed challenge." The minutes ticked by. The students, intrigued by the unusual commotion, gathered in the corridor, silently watching the scene. Some whispered, "Can James really solve this?" Then, with disconcerting ease, James finished his calculation. He handed the sheet to Mr. Thompson. The latter took the paper and read the solution. His face paled, his arrogance wavered. The solution was perfect, accurate at every step. Silence fell over the corridor. Even the students held their breath. Mr. Thompson, unable to find a word, dropped the sheet of paper onto his desk, his hands trembling. James nodded, picked up his broom, and resumed his task as if nothing had happened. He needed neither glory nor recognition. But for those who had been watching, a new truth had dawned: never judge a book by its cover. In a corner of the corridor, a young student named Malik was watching James with admiration. "Wow," he murmured. "This man is incredible." And in James's mind, a plan was beginning to take shape. He knew his talents could do far more than solve equations in the shadows. But to achieve that, he would first have to confront those who had always underestimated him, and surprise them in ways they never imagined. The next morning, Roosevelt School was enveloped in an unusual atmosphere. Students whispered in the hallways, discussing James Carter's incredible performance. Even the teachers, in hushed voices, murmured incredulous remarks. But James, true to form, moved calmly forward with his cleaning cart, as if nothing had changed. He knew the power of discretion, he had never sought to impress anyone, and his genius was not a trophy to be displayed. However, some things needed to be put back in place. Mr. Thompson, humiliated by the previous day's events, had spent the night brooding. In his staff room, he muttered, "How could a mere janitor, He couldn't find the words, but his resentment was obvious. He decided that James needed to be put in his place, once and for all. During math class, he issued a public challenge to the students, to solve an advanced logic and algebra problem within a limited time. Most of the students failed, frustrated by the complexity of the exercise. It was then that Malik, the young student who had observed James the day before, approached timidly. "Mr. Carter, could you help me understand this problem?" James looked at the problem and, without a word, began to explain patiently, step by step, using simple words and clear analogies. The students began to understand for the first time what had seemed impossible to them. Some stared wide-eyed, amazed by his ability to make complex algebra crystal clear. Mr. Thompson, who was in the room, felt anger rising within him. It's impossible," he murmured. But he couldn't say anything without sounding ridiculous. The students, captivated, listened to James with admiration. At the end of the lesson, Malik, his eyes shining, said, "Mr. Carter, you are incredible. You could teach here, really." James smiled, but shook his head gently. "I prefer to stay in the shadows, Malik. Sometimes the world is too busy judging to really listen." But an idea was beginning to take root in his mind. If the world would not listen in the shadows, perhaps he needed to find a way to reveal his genius to the world, and show that even the most arrogant must recognize the truth. This chapter ended with James pushing his cart down the hall, while the students watched him with silent admiration. The janitor was no longer invisible to some, and a silent transformation had begun at Roosevelt School. A few days had passed since James Carter's incredible demonstration. The halls of Roosevelt School were still alive with whispers and intrigued glances. Some students had begun to side with him, while others regarded Mr. Thompson with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. But James wasn't there for applause. His objective was more subtle, to reveal the arrogance of those who thought themselves superior. That morning, Mr. Thompson had devised a new plan. He had created an internal math competition, designed to publicly disqualify James. He believed that the janitor, however intelligent, could never compete with problems specifically designed to challenge an expert. James, of course, accepted the challenge, with disconcerting calm. The competition took place in the school gymnasium, which had been transformed into an academic arena for the occasion. Students, staff, and several teachers were present, intrigued by this unexpected confrontation between an arrogant professor and a discreet janitor. When the first problem was posted, a heavy silence fell. Mr. Thompson smiled, certain of his triumph. James took a deep breath, studied the equations, and methodically began to solve each problem with a precision and speed that astonished even the most skeptical spectators. The students whispered, "He's still doing it." And what made things worse for Mr. Thompson was that James didn't just find the solution. He explained each step aloud, like an experienced professor, demonstrating his complete mastery of the advanced concepts. His explanations were clear, elegant, and almost artistic in their logic. At the end of the competition, James had not only solved all the problems, but he had also outperformed Mr. Thompson in front of everyone. The humiliated professor felt anger and embarrassment overwhelm him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. James, as always, remained calm. He bowed slightly to the audience, then picked up his broom and cart, leaving the gymnasium as if he had just finished an ordinary task. In the silence that followed, Malik and several students stood up, applauding discreetly, while others murmured among themselves about the true nature of the concierge. And in James's mind, a bigger idea was taking shape. If he could continue to expose the injustices and arrogance of those who despised him, he could transform the entire school into a place where respect and intelligence mattered more than status or skin color. This chapter ended with a symbolic scene, James pushing his trolley down the corridor, his eyes calm, while Mr. Thompson watched his silhouette disappear, aware that his reputation had just suffered an irreversible blow. After his resounding victory in the gymnasium, James Carter began to feel that his role went far beyond simply sweeping the halls. Every day, he carefully observed the students, teachers, and staff, spotting the injustices, prejudices, and silent humiliations that went unnoticed. That morning, in the school library, James noticed a group of first-grade students, visibly intimidated by their schoolwork and the disparaging remarks of some of their teachers. Their anxiety was palpable. Without a word, James approached and, with a discreet gesture, began to guide them through a complex problem in applied physics. He used simple analogies, precise gestures, and relentless logic to transform the incomprehensible into something clear. Within minutes, the students, who had seemed lost, began to understand, and the fear on their faces gave way to wonder. Malik, who was with him, murmured, "It's incredible, he makes everything easy, but I don't understand why no one has ever noticed it." James smiled inwardly. He knew that education wasn't limited to classrooms or official curricula. It was an act of justice and the sharing of knowledge, and he fully intended to use his genius to restore balance to this often unjust environment. But his influence did not go unnoticed. The school administrator, Mrs. Henderson, a woman respected for her impartiality and wisdom, began to notice the changes. The students were showing more confidence, discipline was improving, and even the teachers, once skeptical, were beginning to recognize James's worth. However, Mr. Thompson, still blinded by his pride, couldn't bear to see the concierge shine. He began to plot new schemes to ridicule James in front of everyone, believing his authority was threatened. But James, always several steps ahead, anticipated every move with disconcerting foresight. One afternoon, while James was repairing a leak in the chemistry lab, he discovered serious errors in the safety protocols that no one had noticed. Calmly and determinedly, he corrected the instructions, preventing a potential accident that could have seriously injured students. The next day, the students and staff quietly congratulated James on his vigilance. Mr. Thompson, who had witnessed the scene, felt his pride wounded once again. But James, true to himself, never sought recognition. His quiet smile said it all. He acted not for glory, but for justice and the pursuit of truth. This chapter ended with James pushing his cart down the corridor, his eyes attentive to everything happening around him, knowing that he was not just a janitor. He had become the silent guardian of the integrity of Roosevelt School. The long-awaited day arrived. Roosevelt School was holding its annual assembly, bringing together students, teachers, parents, and even some members of the school board. The air was thick with tension and curiosity. Many still remembered how James Carter had challenged Mr. Thompson and changed the dynamics of the school. Mr. Thompson, aware that his reputation was at stake, took to the stage with a forced smile, preparing his usual speech on the superiority of teachers and the importance of academic authority. He naively thought that James would remain in the shadows, as always. But James had prepared his own surprise. Without announcing anything, he entered the auditorium, pushing his trolley. Eyes turned towards him, some intrigued, others mocking. He stopped in the center of the stage, and a heavy, solemn silence fell. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began in a calm but confident voice, "you have always seen me as a simple janitor. But today, I want to show you what competence, perseverance, and a passion for knowledge truly mean." He produced a stack of papers, charts, and diagrams he had secretly prepared. Then, methodically, he solved several extremely complex math and physics problems live, explaining each step with a clarity that astonished the audience. The students were speechless, the parents whispered amongst themselves, and some teachers, incredulous, watched the scene as if they were witnessing a miracle. Mr. Thompson, red with anger and humiliation, tried to intervene, but his words fell silent in the face of the undeniable truth. James wasn't just competent, he was a genius, recognized by everyone now. Then James revealed his centerpiece, a scientific project he had secretly developed to improve the safety and efficiency of the school's laboratories, an innovation that even the most experienced teaching staff would not have imagined. The applause was immediate and overwhelming. From students to school board members, everyone was on their feet. James Carter, the unassuming janitor whom no one had ever taken seriously, had transformed everyone's perception in just a few minutes. Mr. Thompson, humiliated in front of everyone, stepped back, unable to retaliate. And James, true to form, smiled slightly. He had not sought revenge, but to reveal the truth. At the end of the meeting, Malik approached and said, "Mr. Carter, you are incredible. You have changed the way we see everyone here." James nodded. Sometimes, all it takes is showing that talent and value aren't measured by looks or status. That day, Roosevelt School never saw James Carter as just a janitor again. He had become a silent legend, an example of genius and dignity, and a powerful reminder never to underestimate someone because of their role or the color of their skin. The now famous cleaning cart continued to roll through the corridors, carrying with it the symbol of an intelligence and wisdom long invisible but finally recognized.